My name is Davar, and I will be talking to you guys today on ways on how to personalize your diet like a pro. How does this work? Okay, great. So before I begin, I wanted to introduce you to this concept of nudging. Richard Thaler won a Nobel Prize for introducing this term. What it does is it examines the way we make decisions. As a dietitian, I talk about healthy eating all day, every day. How many of you know what healthy eating looks like? Most of you do. Most of you have an idea. None of you need another lecture on healthy eating, right? But what I'm going to make you do today is to examine how you decided and made that decision what healthy eating looks like for you, and to make you think on innovative ways of looking at food and therefore maybe changing your dietetic habits, right? And nudging you into direction of thinking innovatively about food and your nutrition. So my name is Ella Davar, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and a health coach. So in today's talk, we're going to talk a little bit on nutrition expertise, and then we'll cover the general diet advice, which you all know, and it's pretty boring. But then I'm going to give you all the tools on how to personalize your diet. So get your notepads ready. All right, so first of all, nutrition expert. Who can claim the title, right? A lot of us receive the knowledge from either dietitians, nutritionists, or some sort of coaches, right? Whoever you listen to, as long as that person bases their recommendations on you specifically, on your bio-individuality, you can trust that person, okay? I happen to be all three, so that's why I'm here today talking about it. And actually about dietitians. Dietitians are the only licensed medical professionals qualified to give nutrition advice in a healthcare system, right? But you probably haven't heard about many famous nutritionists and dietitians because, I mean, there's a reason, right? Most people who give nutrition advice these days are doctors or scientists or biohackers, right? So whoever it is, as long as they take into account your bio-individuality, you can trust them. So this is my journey. I came into this field with a lot of health struggles. As a young immigrant, I found myself working in New York on Wall Street, leading a very stressful lifestyle. And as a young overachiever and high performer, I've dealt with mental health, anxieties, stress, skin issues, weight gain. I spent every dollar that I've earned on Wall Street to all these doctors to give it back, to try to buy my health back. And that's how I ended up. I tried every diet. Like, I tried to lose weight. I tried every diet: Ayurvedic, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Whole30, paleo, keto. And that's how I decided to become a master of this and learn how to personalize my diet and help my clients. Actually, this dietitian changed my life. She ran a food sensitivities and intolerances panel for me, and that changed my relationship with food, the way I looked at it, and therefore it changed my life and my career path. So I became a health and nutrition expert, and then went on to receive a master's degree from NYU on clinical nutrition. So what is the optimal nourishment? A lot of us are asking these questions, but the answer is not as precise. I mean, if I were to break it down, I would break it down to what your cells require. And those are the three elements they require: oxygen, water, which I'm sure you guys heard of from other speakers on this conference, and there's a lot of equipment and resources in the whole. But I'm going to focus on nutrients today. Nutrients, specifically glucose, minerals, and vitamins. So here's to simply answer the question, the optimal nourishment. This is what it looks like. These are all the factors of critical thinking that need to be considered before I answer that question. All of these things play a huge role for me to answer the question what the optimal nourishment looks like for you if you were to be my client, right? But I teach a course called Become Your Own Dietitian, and you guys are going to get a lecture on it today. And my mission to support and create more leaders of their own health, people who are capable to make the decision that is right for them, with the support and accountability of the experts, of course. Okay, so a lot of people, especially us biohackers, we know a lot, right? But when I ask them, it's like, how's your diet? Like, you eat pretty healthy? And they're like, yeah, I eat healthy. But when I dig deeper, I uncover a lot of symptoms that people just accustomed to. They're like, oh, I have acid reflux once in a while, so what, right? Or I have, fatigue or brain fog. Happens to all of us, right? We're also leading a stressful lifestyle. Actually, if we were to dig deeper and look at some of those symptoms and to try all those tools that I'm going to give you today, right? Some people realize that there's a whole new level of well-being. And this is what the future of ultimate well-being looks like, and the future of nutrition field. It is in personalization and finding out the root causes that are specifically designed for you. So food can actually, I treat food as medicine, and a lot of biohackers think that we just need, another supplement to solve all problems, right? But I call myself a professional foodie, and I'm going to help you today to find out the answers and use food as a tool to make you feel better. Okay, so number one things to consider genetics. There's 3 pillars that I use to diet personalization. Number one is genetics. It's what that you were born with, right, the nature. And then we look at the advanced blood work. We look at how your body is, how your cells are metabolizing, what you're doing to it every day. And then we're looking at your microbiome, something that's outside of you in your intestines, and looking how that environment, which is outside of you but still inside of you, affects your well-being. So genetics is the tool that I use, genetic testing. It's a very important thing, which a lot of dietitians overlook, but not in the biohacking community. So our DNA is like a huge recipe of a book of recipes, right? And our genes are like those specific steps that require and like describe every recipe, right? But then there's epigenetics. How many people are familiar? Epigenetics is what happens to your genes as you live your life, right? All the changes that your genes go throughout the life. It's like those like the yellow sticky notes that you put on your recipe. I've tried that, I've done that, forget this, we're totally deficient of that, just skip the whole step, right? So that's what happens to us, and that's what leads to premature aging, and I'm gonna give you guys the tools on how to find out for yourself. So, and then after genetics, very important to talk to your family. Before I give you the biohacking and biomonitoring tools, very important to know your ancestors, right? To have that personal history, because some of the health conditions that your family struggle with is still part of you, right? And you can be genetically predisposed to it. And knowing that, like most doctors these days ask for the health, not just of your parents, but also the health of your great-grandparents, right? Very important to ask these questions and to include this information in your consideration of how you're preventing the disease. But I'm going to focus on food from now on. So most American people outside of our community receive their diet advice from and dietary guidelines from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, right? The most generic nutrition advice that I've been trained to give. So, and this, the MyPlate.gov and these recommendations, they were originally, they started them in 1980. And since then, every year they update them. But if you look at the Center for Disease Control, 70% of Americans have a high rates of obesity, diabetes, right, and non-alcoholic liver disease. And I wonder why. Is it because they don't listen to the advice? Or because they do, right? And the truth is, the statistics show that most people do listen to advice. And most people are looking for advice, right? And they want to follow some sort of wisdom, right? So most of us figured that out, that this is too generic, this is not specific enough, and transition to experts, right? That's why I included those book covers there. There's a lot of experts out there. Most of them happen to be doctors, scientists, and most of them are still contradicting. There is a diet that talks about low-fat diets, right, around 20 years ago. Now, these days, it's a high-fat diet. There's a diet that talks about bad things about animal protein and wants you to be vegan. And then there's something that tells you that grains are bad for you. It's still very confusing, right? And most of us doing the trial and error and trying to pick a side, right? Then there's the Instagram influencing. Someone mentioned yesterday how social media affects our decision-making, right? It's advertising. Back in the days, they've done research on advertising, how kids get all these cravings suddenly for this type of breakfast over another because of the influence that we get. And I don't know if you notice, after you put your phone down, and suddenly you get this craving for something, but if you were to establish the connection of the decision making, you might have seen something from before, some influencer posted that, some respected person said that this is good, and that's what influences your decision making, which is not necessarily bad or good, it's just what is, right? My job today is to make you think critically, and that's why I included that. So, what is the best diet for humans, right? You would think the dietitian will be able to answer this question. So I studied this question. And what I realized, again, there's a lot of contradicting information. Guess what? A lot of science behind all of this, and all of them say the good things about all of this, right? What I realized is that we've been asking the wrong question. Because what this question assumes is that the diet for humans depends on the food, not on the human, right? And all of the scientific research is on this general population group that's probably different than you, or, I don't know, alike if you're lucky, right? So what I'm here to propose today is to ask the question, what is the best diet for you as a human, right? The unique human being that you are. And I'm going to give you all the tools to get to know yourself and treat your body with utmost respect and listen to its cues, right? Your body is telling you something always. So these are all the things that I'm gonna talk about it and touch on today to answer this question, right? For you to be able to take responsibility for your health and decide for yourself what is the best diet for you, and become, as I call, not vegetarian or paleo or pescatarian, become you-tarian, right? If you're Julia, I want you to become Julia-tarian. If you're Steven, I want you to become Steven-tarian. And stop once and for all argue with other people what they should be eating, because you don't know, okay? And they don't know either. Okay. This is just a summary, right? With all these things, whoever says the meat is good for you, there's always someone to talk about inflammation levels, right? Whoever talks about omega-3 and seafood, there's always an opponent. And I'm always able to argue both points, right? But it's very confusing, trust me. So, number one tool to create your own nutrition recommendations for yourself is to do this food allergy and sensitivity testing. This is a test that changed my life back in around 8 years ago, when I got that information, not from someone who went to the school and read smart books, right? But someone who presented the information that my body was trying to communicate, right? And when I took that information into account, it changed my life. So I want to just define briefly the difference between food allergies. Most of you know if you've had food allergies, right? This is what's called the IgE type 1 hypersensitivity. You get results right away, right? It's either anaphylactic response or hives that you get. But then there is the IgA and IgG, which is gradual. And it really depends on the food. It could take hours. It could take up to days for you to experience some sort of minor results, such as bloating or brain fog or lack of energy, right, or skin issues. And most people think that these days, there's a lot of factors that go into those problems. Maybe it's from stress, or maybe it's from something, right? It's hard to guess. But from my experience, the most problematic foods are gluten and dairy. With those two, you can play around. There's what's called this elimination diet, right? Which is still, even in my dietetic field, it's still what's highly recommended. It's trial and error. Try to eliminate those for 21 days and then see what happens, right? But there's a lot of stuff, right? And that's why this test becomes essential, right? There's also the nightshades, right? The soy, grains, beans, nuts and seeds, all of those things could be causing your sensitivity and your body's response to it. Then there's the inflammation test. Most dietitians and doctors agree that C-reactive protein is outdated, that it's not sufficient enough to diagnose the inflammation markers. But I'm sure you guys heard of omega-6 and omega-3 ratio, right? Very important to test these days because we know how ubiquitous the vegetable oils are. They're everywhere in every food that you eat. It's impossible to avoid them. And then there's omega-3. How much should we eat? We already know sardines are good for us, right? We know omega-3 supplementation is good for us, but we're mainly guessing. When we're taking the dose of the supplementations, we're hoping we're doing the right thing, but there should be no room for opinions or guessing. There should be like data. And I highly recommend this test to establish your food intake, right? I always tell my clients at least 2-3 times a week that you should consume seafood, but again, it's a general advice, right? But even with supplementations, I'm going to tell you a little secret, you're going to need a lot of it once you test it, right? So most of these things are like, but I love testing it because we all know that inflammation is a silent killer, right? And the omega-3s are highly beneficial to offset it and prevent the onset of disease. All right, then there's a stool testing, my absolute favorite tool to use to see what's going on inside microbiome. That information is priceless. Most of these tests I recommend doing at least once a year, right? At least just to check what's going on and to see your intestinal microflora. We had a speaker earlier today that was telling us, and I could repeat it too, that your brain, that your gut is your second brain. I'm sure you've heard it. The connection between your microbiome and your immune system, right? The connection, because most of the immune cells are originated from what's called gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And then there's the connection with our mood and our mental health because of serotonin production, which is also originated from the gut, right? So the microbiome becomes very important. And most of the people with depression also have underlying gut condition. That's what research established because of the dysbiosis. But most people who are specializing in mental health don't check that. So I highly recommend you guys trying this one for yourself. And then there's advanced blood testing. Very important for those who love supplements, who love to take them with like a bunch every day, right? Do the testing, advanced cellular metabolism testing with all these antioxidants, amino and fatty acids, all the minerals, which you can get from food. That's when my clients, when they test this, and I tell them something about liver, they look at liver differently. They're like, okay, maybe I can give it a try, right? Because most of us base our food choices on preferences, on childhood experiences, and all these things, not on the data, right? We'd rather supplement. But very important to know your numbers, right? And seeing how just with your food and finding a way to enjoy your food, you can alternate your cellular metabolism and therefore help yourself to feel better. Because your metabolism and your health depends on the metabolism of your cells, right? And if you give your cells what they need, they're going to do the right thing for you, right? Further, the blood testing, which is also DNA testing. I don't know if you guys ever heard of methylation diet. A little bit advanced here, but very important. I recommend this test for people above 40 years old. Very important to see how your body is aging, because accelerated aging starts from our cells. Then we start seeing it in our skin condition, right, and our energy levels. But to prevent that, this is also like those methyl groups that are attached into your DNA. There is a way to offset it. Like a lot of biohackers are asking me, like, okay, so what should I eat to like speed up my metabolism? Like, and I always say, like, trust me, you don't want to speed up your metabolism. That's what causes aging. Maybe when you're a teenager, right, speeding up your metabolism, it's what naturally happens. But here, what you want to do is optimize it and offset the damage that is being done on a daily basis. The pollution, the injuries, and all the things that we're going through. And there's a way to offset it with food, which happens to be fun. I don't know about you guys, but I love food. And I love talking about it, eating it. And then there's metabolism and blood glucose monitor, my favorite toy to recommend. So I'll start with the insulin resistant test. Originally and still used mainly for diabetes diagnosis, but in the longevity science, what we use it for is to establish your insulin response and to measure your insulin sensitivity. Very important to know how your body reacts to sugars, right? And then with that information and your average blood sugar trends, what we do is we monitoring, and that absolutely changes people's ability, like how they look at food. I use that for to slow down the aging and also to help weight loss, especially people who are older, but like at any age. So what it does, the continuous glucose monitor, I first heard about continuous glucose monitor around 10 years ago when I studied in Israel at the Weizmann Institute of Science. That's when they introduced me to the idea that the future of nutrition field is in personalization. Back then, it sounded like magic. I was like, well, I don't know about that. This is too advanced, right? But now we all understand. Like, how many people have experience with blood glucose monitoring? So I have clients who use it as a couples, husband and wife, and when they see different response to the same food that they're eating, that's when it hits them. Like, this is just like, it's really up to me to improve my metabolism, not up to these other general recommendations. So what happens when we eat different types of carbohydrates? Our blood glucose goes up, and it could be uniquely damaging to our health. And it really depends on you. Some people are more sensitive to glucose. Other people are more sensitive to fructose. I'm sure you've heard about that. Fruits are bad for you, right? That's where it comes from. Again, very highly personalized response. So very important to monitor. Here's what it looks like. Right, so you wear the continuous glucose monitor on your tricep for 14 days. Nothing, trust me, nothing trumps the 30 minutes after effect. So usually when it comes to weight loss, it's kind of, the feedback loop is huge, right? It's like it's the number on the scale, which hopefully will change in a week, right? Or it's the number on your blood panel, which you do at the doctor's office, I don't know how many times a year, right? But this is able to change a person's way of looking at food. They're like, but I love this, but look what it does to me. Whoa, maybe I should look at it differently, right? And that's what I love about my job, that it's no longer about the dietitian, Ella told me this, or this wonderful diet book I read, right? It's my body's talking to me, and I better listen, right? Because I'm either damaging it or I'm not. It's up to me, okay? So there are other things that affect our blood glucose levels, which is stress and sleep, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit further. But yes, here's about meal timing. So when we figured out what to eat and how to eat, and we've done all those tests, right? And now we're looking at food as a tool. Okay, like I want to feel healthy, like what should I eat, right? It's a book that I'm writing that's called Eat Like Your Life Depends on It, which is true, we shouldn't be scared of food. But then there's so much emergent science behind fasting. And what I love about fasting, from the very conservative schooling that I come from, the dietitian, that it's not a fad, right? It's been used for millennials, right? And it's still part of some of the religious rules. And the meal timing becomes very important and, ta-da, highly personalized, okay? It's not one thing that's like gonna solve everyone's problem, right? Everyone have to try their own. There's two approaches to it. One is daily daily fasting, and another one is weekly, right? The daily is when you're continually monitoring your food intake throughout the day. The best practices are stop eating at least 4 or 5 hours before you go to bed for optimal metabolism, and then start eating later in the day. Or there's a weekly fasting, right? So when you eat whatever you want throughout the week, and then you fast for a full 24 hours or 48 hours at the end of the week. And then there's a fasting mimicking diet. Again, very important to make that, before you make these decisions, first to see all the answers to all those advanced blood work and microbiome testing that I've done before, to even make a decision. It's like, this is actually easy. People are like, find this much easier to control the time, but like what happens in between, or like when we're like supposed to be eating, that's what to me is more important. No, equally important. I'm going to leave it at that. And then there's stress. And there's so much research now emerging behind, like I love saying that you are what you eat, right? But truthfully, you are what you digest, right? And what your body is able to absorb when it's able to prioritize digestion. But let's face it, most of us are going through life highly stressed out, right? And when your body is in a sympathetic nervous system, which is activating your fight or flight response, it's not prioritizing digestion, right? So therefore, stress is something that I always talk to my clients, and I also specialize in personalized meditation and weight loss hypnosis, because I realized when I started doing this and working with people, it's like, why do we do what we do when we know what we know, right? We know a lot about what we should be eating, but that's when we deal with stress levels, everything goes out the window. Like, we just need to nourish ourselves with whatever's in the front of us, right? So knowing your stress response, I love the saliva test for cortisol, because again, everyone's different. Everyone's response to certain things are different, right? Like, I work with people from the low-income populations to the highest net worth profiles, right? And guess what? Everyone has the same problem. It's lack of time and stress levels, right? But they all deal with different levels of stress, but knowing, measuring helps us. So how many people here have done the cortisol response and the saliva test? Yeah, okay. Very important to know, and therefore, another thing that I was going to mention, fasting can cause additional stress to people. So before we make that decision, that's why I coach my clients like into those decision making to not cause it more stress, to make it adjusted to your lifestyle instead of listening to this advice that you received from the outside. And then there's the menstrual cycle, very important when you're making your decision on how you should nourish yourself. So that's why when I give create meal plans, it's always for 28 days, right? Again, very important to measure this tool that I use, the cycle mapping maps, which helps my female clients to see what's going on inside their body and throughout the 28 days, throughout their cycle, and what kind of nourishment they need throughout those weeks. And same thing with fasting also. Like, when it comes to fasting recommendations, very important to know where you are in your cycle. And I generally only recommend for females only 2 weeks per month of fasting, and then the 2 weeks during your ovulation periods that are not. And then there's seasonality. Once we figured out what we should be eating, depends on us, right? Depends on what we need. We have to consider where we live. We are part of the huge environment group, right? And we need to, the longevity science indicates that people who live above 100 years old, they nourish themselves from locally grown food, right? So, and if we can't and not able to grow our own food, there's farmers markets, right? You can download the seasonal food shopping list on my website, but it's very important to personalize your diet and take seasonality into account, right? To eat foods according to what nature produces in that timing. And actually, studies show that even broccoli grown in its peak season, which happens to be fall, is more nutrient dense and has highest vitamin C content compared to broccoli grown in the spring. So very important to give this a chance to support local farmers and help yourself to eat a better way. And then once we figured out all of that, somebody got to cook our food, right? So somebody got to make it happen for us. That's why I created this book, The Healthy Cooking for High Performance, which I cook all of my meals myself. And if I were to do some elaborate recipes, I would be like the slave or the prisoner of my kitchen. Not happening. So I nourish my body and my family, but most of my recipes are 20 minutes top, right? So this book is full of simple recipes for those who love to eat and live life to the fullest. You can find it on my website. And then I also teach a course, how to become your own dietitian, right? You can find that group course on my website and many other things. And now I'm going to open it up to questions. Is there anything that you guys would add? Yes?
So since we have this global market of creating food, any time of the year, I can have broccoli. Anytime there's
Yeah.
you might get it from Mexico, the United States, whatever. So if I don't know generally what seasonal foods are,
Yeah.
it sounds kind of dumb, but
Yeah.
where would I go?
Talk to your farmers market. Talk to your farmers. Find the farmers market and talk to the farmers and ask them. That conversation can change your life. Look at their hands. Those people who touch the food, right, that ends up on your plate, that energy exchange, and have a conversation with them, right, and find out the answers from them, because you'll find a lot of wisdom from them and how they, again, organic farmers market nowadays, depends on the philosophy behind those, but the small farmers market, most of them are mission driven, that they keep it small and no pesticides, none of those huge greenhouses that can do everything the whole year round. But yeah, if you're curious about it, like you'll find the answers. But the number one tool at farmers market. Okay. Yes?
What is the integrity of the food testing? Because I mean, years ago, I didn't know that a food test existed, and I've been considering doing that for some personal reasons. But I'm like, what do you know about the integrity of these foods? Are they just a bunch of hype, or do you think there's some integrity and truth to them?
Which one? The stool testing or the blood testing?
The blood testing.
This.
Well, I did one of those before, and I'm very interested.
The food sensitivities and tolerance. Yes, there's a lot of conversations, like some doctors that are more conservative, they don't believe in it, but it's most functional medicine doctors use it. So again, depends on your results, right? I would like support you through it, like to see if you were to implement those changes, right? So some of my clients, they get this result that bananas are bad for you. How would I ever guess that for them, right? Or celery. Forget bananas, yeah, they're bad, they have fructose, right? Someone can have something against them, right? Celery or cashews and things like that, right? So it's worth trying. Definitely worth trying, especially if you're someone like my client who is a biohacker who does everything he can but still find yourself spinning your wheels, right? And most of the things, what happens when you just eliminate a few things, some of the chronic conditions and some of the most persistent symptoms can go away. So it's definitely worth trying and seeing for yourself. Yes?
What is your favorite brand for microbiome testing?
My favorite, okay, if I were to go conservative, there's Genova Labs that I absolutely love. Hard to get, like you have to like speak to the doctors first. And then I was just reviewing, I was walking around with this new lab that I just met, like around the corner here. The guy who was before me, the brain and gut axis. So they seem to have a legit lab that I'm going to check out. And then there's Viome, there's a lot of different things, Viome, I just keep hearing different. I know, it's not, it's interesting, it's affordable, it's accessible, it's easy to establish, right? But if I were to do it, or like to go deep with you, I would like, take a Genova Labs, which is my favorite. Huh? Godzoomer, there's another lab. All right? Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, thank you. I hope you feel empowered.